Good day, everybody. My name is Courtney, and I'll be the driver of this session.
Hello, my name is Ulrich, and I'll be the navigator of the session.
So this is Chapter 6, Building Forms using Formik. So in this chapter, we look at how to implement forms in React using an external library called Formik. So we use this to create forms, but why? We can certainly create forms in React without an external library, but as requirements for the form increase, for example, validation of forms fields, you will realize, annoyingly, that one has to create a lot of code to get values. And in one form state, validation, and showing of error messages and handling form submissions. So this is basically just a help, and it just handles a lot more things. So in our chapter 6, let me just close that. We're looking at our user form.js. So obviously here we're importing React, and we're going to import Formik, form field, and error message from Formik. So this is just importing components for form handling, basically. So here we have our class user form extends components. This is just defining the user form components. Here we have props again, very important. This is calling the parent class constructor with props. So this is just going to be rendered on the front end. Here we have setting initial values for the form fields. We've got custom validation function. And then it's going to be object to store validation errors. We have email validation. So basically this is where we input our emails. And a password over here. So email doesn't match regex pattern. Email is less than 10 characters. So obviously it has, when you type out your email, it will say email needs to be more than 10 characters. And here we have our password validation. So obviously it's required, therefore empty. And then password too short. Minimum is 8. It can obviously be longer than 8, but minimum is 8. Then we have our return errors. Obviously everything returns, it will return all validation errors. On submit, so this is basically going to be called when the form is being submitted. Yeah, it's just a lot basically. Here it's just going to render props pattern to access the Formik states and helpers. Our email input field is kind of required, obviously. So that is, and then it's just going to export so it can go elsewhere. That is basically user form. So that's the wrong one. So let's open our terminal. Let's go start. Okay. There we go, and start. So here you can see any place in your app. So I'm just going to put in an email, and then I'm going to start typing a password. I did that wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we're going to click submit. And here we'll just see an alert message saying localhost 3000 says email, my email, and then password 1 through 8. But now you see password required 1, 2, 3, 4. Password too short. Can't submit, and it won't because password's too short. The minute you go up to 8, submit, boom. Then you press OK and it goes away. Now, okay. So let me just close up this. So the summary of this chapter. In this chapter, we learned how to create a form using the Formik library. We learned how to handle form inputs, how specific form field validation errors, and perform form submission. Now all we have to do is get an API. So here in chapter 7, here in chapter 7, it's getting data from RESTful APIs with Axios. Excuse me if I'm saying that horribly wrong and slaughtering it. So this had a lot of errors. I've tried to fix it. I've only gotten so far. So I'll do my best to explain. So in this chapter we will see how to call backend services to get data through RESTful APIs with the Axios library. So our GitHub RESTful API, Boolean RESTful APIs is beyond the scope of React because React is the client-side technology, whereas Boolean RESTful APIs require server-side technology, so that would be backend, like Node.js, ASP.NET, Ruby, and Rails, and so on. Later in chapter 9, okay, this isn't important right now, so we will illustrate by connecting. Okay, so obviously this is what we'd see if we go to api.github.com. There. So the newest module that we have here is our github.js. So obviously we're going to import all the necessary libraries and components, React, Axios, for making HTTP requests, React loading for showing a loading spinner, and then media form, form group, form control, and button. Obviously that's Bootstrap components for layout and forms. So here we're going to create a class on line 8. We're going to create a class based React component. So we're going to call it GitHub. And we have a super. So super is kind of like the parent class. We've got an initial state. So data is going to store GitHub user data. Search term stores user search inputs. And then isLoading is just going to track if the data is currently being fetched. Then behind this, two event handlers. So this is just the event handlers really. Here we have optional lifecycle method called after component mounts. You can use this to fetch initial data if needed. Component D ID mount. This is just like get the ID data from GitHub. This is just an example. Update search in state when the input changes. So this just is going to handle change. It will update the search. Then here, this just handles the submission. Then it will prevent the page from refreshing. Is loading true? Show loading spinner while fetching your information or whatever you searched. And then this is just going to fetch all GitHub users. And this fetches GitHub users based on a search term. So I'm assuming if you just search your name, perhaps it will bring up what it could find. Obviously, if is loading set to false, it will stop loading spinner. Then store fetched user data and log results after a debugging. So all of this is just going to map over fetch data to create a media element for each user. So obviously this just goes into everything. This is just client-side stuff. Then this is going to return everything for the client-side to see. And then this loading spinner while fetching data. So this is going to load the spinner, obviously, and then again it's going to render the user list on list users. So it will all just like list the users basically. And then this is just exporting GitHub, so it will appear in like other modules and stuff. So let me break this, open this. Now let's just wait. So here you can see enter search term and click search or enter on your keyboard, and then this displays your GitHub user results. So I want to search this, right? But here are where the rest of my errors come in. Uncaught runtime error. So I'm going to try fix that. But there might be some examples in the the textbook. So let's keep going down. Maybe not. But this is the loading stuff it should show, but because my code's not properly working, it won't show that. So if you search Greg, for example, this is what would be displayed. If I were to search what I wanted to, it would just give me a list as well. So that's basically what chapter 7 is doing. So yeah, the user results, obviously. So in summary, I can just get there. In this chapter, we learn how to implement a GitHub user search application by connecting our React app to the GitHub RESTful API using Axios, promises, component lifecycles, and displaying a loader icon. The minute I can get it properly working, I will make a new video.